The courtroom was so silent, you could hear a pin drop. The air was thick with tension. Judge Harold Mitchell, a man known for his composure, sat frozen in his seat, his gavel trembling in his grip. His face, once stern and unreadable, was now pale as a ghost. He blinked rapidly, struggling to process what had just happened. The prosecution attorney, a tall, sharp-looking man in his 40s, dropped his pen. The defense lawyer turned slowly toward his client, his face unreadable. The entire jury sat in stunned silence, some leaning forward, others whispering amongst themselves. At the center of it all stood a little girl, just 9 years old. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, her hands gripping the wooden rail in front of her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't stammering. Her voice had been firm, unwavering. "Can you repeat that?" the judge finally croaked out. The girl, Emily Carter, took a deep breath. Then, with eyes burning with a mix of fear and determination, she said it again. "My mom did not do it. But I know who did." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily's mother, Sarah Carter, who had been sitting at the defense table with tears in her eyes, looked up in shock. The prosecution attorney exchanged glances with his assistant, clearly rattled. Judge Mitchell wiped his brow, his mind racing. This case was supposed to be cut and dry. The evidence against Sarah Carter was overwhelming. She had been accused of arson, burning down the home of her wealthy ex-boss, Donald Grayson, after being fired from her job at his company. Witnesses claimed she had been seen near the house on the night of the fire. The forensic team found traces of gasoline on one of her jackets. And now, after weeks of testimonies and damning evidence, the jury was expected to reach a verdict. But in the final moments of the trial, Sarah's daughter, this 9-year-old girl, had stood up and said something that no one saw coming. Emily looked directly at Judge Mitchell, her little hands shaking now. "I saw something that night. And I know who really did it." The judge inhaled deeply. He had no choice but to respond. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice steadying, "are you telling this court that you have information that was not presented before?" Emily nodded. "Yes." The judge looked at the prosecutor. "Do you want to cross-examine?" The man hesitated. Then, trying to regain control, he cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Miss Carter, this is very serious. Are you aware of the consequences of lying under oath?" Emily's lips quivered, but she nodded. "I know. I'm not lying." The courtroom waited with bated breath. Judge Mitchell leaned forward, his voice firm but curious. "Then tell us, Emily, who really set the fire?" Emily turned her gaze toward the back of the courtroom, toward a man sitting in the gallery, unnoticed until now. And then, with absolute certainty, she pointed. The moment her small finger stretched out, the man's face turned pale. His hands clenched the edge of the wooden bench. It was Donald Grayson himself. A stunned murmur filled the courtroom. Gasps. A sharp intake of breath from Sarah Carter. A shift in the jury's body language as they turned to face the powerful businessman, who now sat rigid, his face white as a sheet. "Mr. Grayson," the judge called out, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Please stand." Donald Grayson hesitated. His fingers twitched. Then, slowly, he rose to his feet. The entire courtroom was on edge. Emily had just flipped the entire trial upside down. Judge Mitchell took a slow breath. "Miss Carter, you are making a very serious accusation. Are you prepared to explain to this court exactly what you saw?" Emily's throat tightened. Her legs felt weak. But she had to do this. Taking one final deep breath, she opened her mouth. And everything changed. A tense silence filled the courtroom. Every eye was on Emily, but she kept her focus on Donald Grayson. He wasn't just a rich, powerful businessman. He was the man who had ruined her mother's life. And now, Emily was going to reveal the truth. She swallowed hard, then spoke. "I couldn't sleep that night," she said, her voice clear despite the fear bubbling inside her. "I woke up and went to the window. I saw him." She pointed again at Donald Grayson, whose face had gone rigid. "I saw him outside Mr. Foster's store, across the street from his house. He was wearing a dark coat, and he had a can in his hand. He poured something all over the grass near his house, and then," she took a breath, her small hands trembling. "Then he lit a match." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, the murmur of disbelief. The prosecutor's mouth opened slightly, his confidence shaken. Sarah Carter clutched her chest as if the words had physically struck her. The defense lawyer immediately turned to Judge Mitchell. "Your Honor, this testimony is crucial. I move for an immediate investigation into Mr. Grayson's involvement." But before the judge could respond, Donald Grayson spoke. "This is absurd," he scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "You're taking the word of a 9-year-old?" He looked at the jury, trying to regain control. "She's just a kid. A scared little girl who doesn't understand what she's talking about." Emily's face burned, but she stood her ground. "I know what I saw," she shot back. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Grayson, you will not speak out of turn." He turned to Emily. "Miss Carter, you're saying you personally witnessed Mr. Grayson at the scene of the fire?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor, clearly unsettled, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, even if this testimony were credible, there's no evidence linking Mr. Grayson to the crime." "The evidence we have points to Mrs. Carter." "Does it?" Emily's voice cut through the noise. She turned back to the prosecutor, her eyes filled with something beyond her years. "You said my mom had gasoline on her jacket, right?" The prosecutor nodded. "But my mom doesn't drive," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "She takes the bus everywhere. She's scared of cars after the accident with my dad." Sarah Carter's eyes widened in realization. The defense attorney caught on just as quickly. "Your Honor," he interjected, "if Sarah Carter doesn't drive, then why would she have gasoline on her clothing? It doesn't make sense." "But you know who does drive. Donald Grayson. And you know who keeps gasoline in their car? People who drive." A ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom. The jury exchanged glances. The prosecutor suddenly looked nervous. Donald Grayson laughed, a sharp, forced sound. "This is ridiculous. You think that's enough to prove I did anything? That's circumstantial." Emily clenched her fists. "That's not all I saw." The judge turned to her sharply. "There's more." Emily took a step forward, determination replacing her fear. "I saw him throw something away in the dumpster near the alley that night. It was small, and it was burning. I told my neighbor, Mr. Albright, about it the next day." The judge's eyes flickered with interest. "And did Mr. Albright see anything?" Emily nodded. "He said he found something weird in the dumpster when he was taking out the trash the next morning." The defense attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor, I formally request the court to summon Mr. Albright as a witness." Before Judge Mitchell could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. "I'm already here." Every head turned. An older man, gray-haired, slightly hunched, and wearing a simple flannel shirt, stepped forward. "It's true," Mr. Albright said, his voice firm. "I saw what the girl saw. There was a burned piece of cloth in my dumpster the next morning. And I still have it." The courtroom exploded. Donald Grayson's face drained of color. The prosecutor, suddenly unsure of himself, turned toward his assistant. The jury was completely thrown off balance. Judge Mitchell banged his gavel, trying to restore order. "Mr. Albright," he said once the room quieted, "you have physical evidence?" Mr. Albright nodded. "Yes, sir. I didn't throw it away because it seemed off. I kept it in my shed." The defense attorney wasted no time. "Your Honor, this could be key evidence. If forensic testing finds traces of accelerant matching the fire, it would prove that someone else was responsible." The judge looked at the prosecutor. "Do you object?" The man hesitated, clearly rattled. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No, Your Honor. The prosecution is prepared to have the evidence tested." Judge Mitchell exhaled. He turned to Donald Grayson. "Mr. Grayson, until we have further information, I suggest you remain available for questioning." Donald Grayson's lips tightened, but he nodded stiffly. His hands were clenched, his breathing uneven. Sarah Carter, who had spent the last few weeks believing she was going to prison for a crime she did not commit, suddenly felt the weight lifting off her shoulders. Emily turned to her mother. Their eyes met. And for the first time in a long time, there was hope. But the danger wasn't over yet. Because Donald Grayson was a man who never lost. And he wasn't about to let a 9-year-old girl ruin him. The courtroom was still buzzing with shock, but Donald Grayson wasn't a man who panicked easily. His fingers twitched against the polished wood of his seat as his sharp mind worked through the problem. This little girl, this insignificant 9-year-old nobody, had just flipped the entire case on its head. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. Judge Mitchell tapped his gavel. Court will adjourn for the day. The prosecution and defense will have 24 hours to review this new testimony and examine the evidence provided by Mr. Albright. Emily let out a shaky breath as her mother wrapped an arm around her. Sarah Carter's eyes were damp, filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Emily, I don't even know how to." "You don't have to," Emily whispered, squeezing her mother's hand. "I just want you home." But as they stood, Emily caught sight of something that made her stomach twist. Donald Grayson was staring straight at her. And he wasn't just angry. He was furious. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with something unspoken. He didn't speak, didn't make a move. He just watched her. Emily's blood ran cold. Her mother must have sensed something because she gently pulled Emily behind her, shielding her daughter with her body. "Let's go," she murmured, nudging her toward the exit. But even as they walked away, Emily could feel it. Grayson wasn't done. He was just getting started. That night, Sarah and Emily returned home to their small, one-bedroom apartment. The air was thick with exhaustion and unease. Sarah locked the door twice, something she never used to do. "Emily," she said softly, brushing her daughter's hair back. "I don't know how you found the courage to speak up today, but I need you to promise me something." Emily looked up. "What?" Sarah knelt so they were at eye level. "No matter what happens, I need you to stay safe. Do you understand me?" Emily nodded, but she could see the worry in her mother's eyes. Sarah kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep, sweetheart." Emily climbed into bed, but sleep never came. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Donald Grayson's face. The way he had looked at her. Like a man with unfinished business. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Emily woke up to a noise outside their window. Her eyes snapped open. The apartment was dark, but the faint glow of the streetlights outside cast shadows across the walls. There it was again. A shuffling sound. Emily held her breath. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window. And then she saw it. A figure standing in the alley below. She couldn't see his face, but she knew who it was. Grayson. Her breath hitched. He was standing just outside the glow of the street lamp, his silhouette barely visible. Watching. Waiting. A chill ran down Emily's spine. She rolled over, trying to stay as quiet as possible. She needed to wake up her mom. But before she could even move, her bedroom door creaked open. Emily's heart nearly stopped. She froze, barely breathing. The darkness swallowed everything, making it impossible to see who had just entered. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Was it her mom? Or was it? A gloved hand clamped over her mouth. Emily's scream was muffled as she kicked wildly, thrashing against the strong arms that grabbed her. The scent of leather and something bitter filled her nose. A deep, quiet voice whispered against her ear. "You should have stayed quiet." The room swallowed her scream. Emily's body thrashed wildly, her small hands clawing at the strong arms wrapped around her. The gloved hand over her mouth muffled her desperate cries, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. She kicked, wriggled, did everything she could, but the man was too strong. Think, Emily. Think. Her mom's room was just down the hall. If she could make any noise, maybe. Crash. A lamp from her nightstand tumbled to the floor, shattering on impact. The man cursed under his breath. He hesitated, just for a split second, before clamping his hand down even harder. But that tiny hesitation was all Emily needed. With every ounce of strength in her small body, she bit down on his hand. Hard. The man yelped in pain, jerking back. His grip loosened, just enough for Emily to slip free. She scrambled off the bed, her feet hitting the cold floor as she lunged for the door. Run. Get to Mom. But just as she reached the hallway, the man grabbed her ankle. Emily screamed as she crashed onto the wooden floor, her elbows scraping against the rough surface. She kicked wildly, her foot smashing into his wrist. He growled, his grip tightening. "Emily!" Her mother's voice. The hallway light flicked on. And standing there, holding a frying pan with shaking hands, was Sarah Carter. Emily didn't hesitate. "Emma, help!" The man whipped his head toward Sarah, just as she swung the frying pan with every bit of force she had. Wham! The sickening crack echoed through the apartment. The man grunted in pain, stumbling back. Sarah didn't wait. She grabbed Emily's arm and ran. They barreled down the hall, past the tiny kitchen, and straight for the front door. Sarah fumbled with the locks, her hands trembling. Behind them, the man was getting up. Emily turned just in time to see him stagger to his feet. His face was still hidden beneath a ski mask. But his stance, his size, it was him. Grayson's man. The lock finally clicked. Sarah yanked the door open and shoved Emily outside. They bolted down the stairs, their bare feet slapping against the cold pavement as they ran. Sarah's breathing was ragged. "Keep running, baby. Don't stop." Emily's legs burned, but she didn't slow down. They burst onto the sidewalk, turning toward the only place they knew would be safe. The police station. 20 minutes later, they sat in the dimly lit office of Detective James Calloway, a burly man with graying hair and tired eyes. Sarah was still shaking. Emily clutched a warm cup of cocoa in her hands, though she was too wired to drink it. Calloway sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're telling me someone broke into your home tonight, attacked your daughter, and you think it's connected to the case?" Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "I don't think I know. Donald Grayson is behind this. He's trying to shut my daughter up." Calloway exhaled slowly. "You understand the weight of what you're saying, right? We don't have solid proof tying him to this yet." Emily finally spoke. "He was watching us." Calloway's gaze snapped to her. Emily swallowed hard, but she forced herself to hold his stare. "I saw him outside our apartment tonight. In the alley. He was waiting." Calloway's face darkened. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the desk. "All right." He turned to another officer. "I want a unit patrolling that apartment." "No." The officer nodded and left the room. Sarah clutched Emily's hand. "We can't go back there." Calloway nodded. "You won't. We'll put you somewhere safe for now." His jaw clenched. "But if Grayson really is involved in this, we're gonna need more than just your word." Emily took a deep breath. Then, with quiet determination, she said, "Then let's get proof." Calloway studied her. This 9-year-old girl, terrified, exhausted, but still willing to fight, was the key to taking Grayson down. And she wasn't done yet. The safe house was nothing special, a small, unmarked motel room on the outskirts of town. It smelled like old carpet and cheap air freshener, but to Emily and her mother, it was sanctuary. 2 officers were stationed outside, their squad car parked nearby. Detective Calloway had promised them protection. But Emily knew better. If Grayson had sent someone into their home, then he wasn't going to give up just because the police were involved. He had too much to lose. Emily sat cross-legged on the motel bed, staring at the wall. Her mother was asleep beside her, exhaustion finally overtaking her. But Emily couldn't sleep. She had just one thought running through her mind. "We need proof." She had told the truth in court. She had pointed at Grayson. But in the end, words weren't enough. The prosecution would still argue that her memory was unreliable. The piece of cloth Mr. Albright had found in the dumpster was something, but what if it wasn't enough? What if Grayson walked free? Emily clenched her fists. She had seen him that night. She knew what he had done. But knowing the truth and proving the truth were 2 very different things. Her heart pounded as an idea formed in her mind. It was dangerous. Insanely dangerous. But it was the only way. She had to get inside Grayson's office. The next morning, Emily sat across from Detective Calloway at a small diner, a plate of untouched pancakes in front of her. Sarah was in the bathroom, and Emily knew this was her only chance to talk to him alone. She leaned forward, keeping her voice low. "You need to let me into Grayson's office." Calloway choked on his coffee. He wiped his mouth, staring at her in disbelief. "I'm sorry, what?" Emily glanced around to make sure no one was listening. He's hiding something. If we can get inside his office, maybe there are emails, security footage, anything that proves he's the one who set the fire. Calloway sighed, rubbing his temples. Kid, I know you're smart, but breaking into the office of one of the most powerful men in the city is not exactly. I don't need to break in, Emily interrupted. I know how to get in without anyone noticing. Calloway studied her for a long moment. You're serious about this, aren't you? Emily nodded. You said it yourself, we don't have solid proof. If we don't find something, he'll walk. And if that happens, she swallowed hard. He won't stop. Calloway exhaled, leaning back in his chair. He had seen a lot in his career. But this? A 9-year-old girl willing to risk everything to bring down a man like Grayson? It was insane. And yet, she was right. Grayson was too calm, too confident. He had something protecting him. If they didn't find real evidence, Sarah Carter would still go to prison. Calloway tapped his fingers against the table, deep in thought. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wire. Emily's breath caught. This is a recording device, Calloway said. It's small, but it's powerful. If you really think you can get inside, you get close to Grayson and get him to admit something. Emily's stomach twisted with nerves, but she took the device. Calloway gave her a hard look. You understand what you're doing, don't you? Emily nodded. I do. Sarah walked back to the table, oblivious to the deal that had just been made. But Emily knew. She was about to walk straight into the lion's den. And she had no idea if she'd make it out. Later that evening, Emily stood outside Grayson Industries, her small frame barely noticeable among the flood of businessmen leaving for the day. She pulled her hoodie tighter around herself. This was it. She took a deep breath, gripping the small recording device hidden beneath her jacket. Then, without hesitation, she slipped inside the building. And just like that, the trap was set. Fire, what would you do if you were in Emily's position? Do you think she's making the right choice, or is she walking into a trap? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The lobby of Grayson Industries was massive. Polished marble floors, sleek modern furniture, and security guards stationed at every entrance. Emily kept her head down, moving carefully through the crowd. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had spent the last 2 years visiting her mom at work before she got fired. She knew the layout of this building. She knew where the security cameras were, which hallways were less traveled, and most importantly, she knew the one way to get upstairs without an access badge. The janitor's closet. She moved toward the side hallway, where a janitor was wheeling out a cart filled with trash bags. Emily slipped behind him, her small frame going unnoticed. The moment he pushed through the back door, she darted inside the closet and shut the door behind her. Dark. Dusty. The faint smell of industrial cleaner. She turned toward the air vent on the back wall. It was small, too small for an adult. But for her, it was perfect. Emily climbed onto a shelf, using her small hands to pry the vent cover open. It creaked loudly. She froze. Listened. No footsteps. No voices. She took a deep breath and crawled inside. The vents were tight and hot, making it hard to breathe. But Emily kept moving. She knew where she was going. Grayson's private office was on the 12th floor. And just outside his office was a supply room, one with a vent opening that led right into his office ceiling. She counted the turns. Right. Left. 2 more lefts. Finally, she reached the grate overlooking Grayson's office. And that's when she froze. Because she wasn't alone. Grayson was inside. And he wasn't alone either. Emily pressed herself against the metal, barely breathing. Below her, Donald Grayson stood by his massive desk, his face tense. Across from him was a man in a black suit. I told you to handle it, Grayson hissed. And you're telling me she got away? The man shifted uncomfortably. The kid fought back. The mother got involved. Then the cops showed up. Grayson's jaw clenched. This is a problem. The man hesitated. Do you want me to take care of it? Emily's blood turned to ice. Grayson didn't answer immediately. He exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. Not yet. If they disappear now, It'll look suspicious. The trial's still ongoing. But once the trial is over, the man asked. Grayson's lips curled into a cold smile. Then they're no longer a problem. Emily's stomach twisted. Grayson wasn't just planning to win the trial. He was planning to eliminate them once it was over. Her fingers shook as she reached for the recording device in her pocket. She clicked it on. Everything was being recorded. But just as she started to shift into a better position, the vent let out a loud creak. Grayson's head snapped up. Emily's heart stopped. Silence. Then, did you hear that? Grayson muttered. The man in black reached for his gun. Emily panicked. She needed to get out now. She backed away from the vent opening, her breathing uneven. She moved too fast. Her elbow hit the metal wall. Bang! The sound echoed through the air duct. Grayson's face darkened. Someone's up there. Emily turned and crawled as fast as she could. Behind her, she heard Grayson yell, "Get them!" Then, gunfire. A bullet ripped through the vent just inches from her foot. Emily screamed. She scrambled forward, ignoring the way her hands burned against the metal. She had to get out, now. Another shot. The vent shook violently. She turned a corner, heart racing, her lungs burning. And then, the vent gave out. She felt the air disappear beneath her. Falling, she crashed through a ceiling tile and landed directly inside a supply closet. Pain shot through her body, but she forced herself up. She couldn't stop. Voices. Footsteps. They were coming. She burst out of the closet, stumbling into the empty hallway. She had seconds before they found her. Her eyes darted to a red emergency exit sign at the end of the hall. Run. She bolted. Behind her, she heard men yelling, footsteps getting closer. She hit the stairwell door at full speed, shoving it open. Down, down, down. Her legs ached. Her lungs screamed for air. She hit the ground floor, nearly collapsing against the door. One final push. She shoved the door open and ran straight into a pair of arms. She screamed, kicking wildly. "Emily! It's me!" She froze. Detective Calloway. His face was pure shock. "What the hell are you doing here?" Emily gasped for air. I got it." She clutched the recorder in her fist. "I got it." Calloway grabbed her shoulders. "What are you talking about?" Before she could explain, the stairwell door slammed open. Grayson's man appeared. Emily screamed. But before the man could move, Calloway pulled his gun. "Don't move." The man hesitated, then turned and bolted back up the stairs. Calloway grabbed Emily's hand. "Come on." They raced out of the building, disappearing into the night. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. She had done it. She had proof. But the war wasn't over. Because now, Grayson knew she was coming for him. Detective Calloway's car sped through the darkened streets, its sirens off, the tension inside as thick as a storm cloud. Emily sat in the back seat, gripping the tiny recorder in her trembling hands. Her knuckles were white. Her chest still heaved from running. Her mother, Sarah, sat beside her, staring at her daughter with shock and fear. "Emily," her voice cracked. "What did you do?" Emily swallowed hard, glancing at Calloway through the rearview mirror. "I got the proof." Calloway's jaw was tight. He didn't speak for a long moment, his fingers clenched around the steering wheel. "You almost got yourself killed," he muttered. Emily knew that. She could still feel the burn in her muscles from running for her life. She could still hear the gunshots ringing in her ears. But none of that mattered. Because now, they had Grayson on tape. She took a shaky breath. "What do we do now?" Calloway turned a sharp corner, tires screeching against the pavement. "We get you somewhere safe." And then, his voice hardened. "We bring this to the DA." Sarah reached for her daughter's hands, her grip desperate. "You should have told me, baby. You shouldn't have done this alone." Emily's throat tightened. "I had to. If we don't stop him, you're going to prison." Sarah's face twisted with pain, but she couldn't argue. Because her 9-year-old daughter had just done something that no one else had been able to do. She had put Grayson on the defensive. 1 hour later, police safe house. The room was small, plain. Just 4 walls and a flickering ceiling light. Emily sat on the edge of a cot, staring at the tiny recorder sitting on the table. Calloway paced the room, waiting, thinking. The plan was simple. Turn the recording over to the district attorney first thing in the morning. Once the evidence was submitted, Grayson wouldn't be able to touch them. But Emily knew better. Grayson wasn't the kind of man to sit back and wait to lose. Something was coming. And she was right. Because at that exact moment, a black SUV pulled up outside the safe house. 2 men stepped out. And they were not cops. Inside the room, Sarah hugged her daughter close, exhaustion weighing her down. "We're almost there, baby. It's almost over." Emily wanted to believe that. But then, bang, bang, bang. A hard knock on the front door. Calloway froze. His hand went to his gun. Emily's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. A voice called from outside. "Detective Calloway. Open the door." Calloway's grip on his weapon tightened. He stepped forward, peeking through the window. And his face went pale. He turned to Sarah. To Emily. His voice was quiet. Urgent. "You two need to hide. Now." Sarah stiffened. "What? Who is it?" Calloway didn't answer. Instead, he moved quickly, ushering them toward the tiny bathroom in the back. He grabbed the recorder off the table and shoved it into Emily's hands. His eyes burned with something serious. "No matter what happens, don't come out. Do you understand me?" Emily's breath hitched. Her mother gripped her arm. "Detective, what's going on?" Calloway hesitated for just a second. Then he whispered. Grayson got to them. Sarah's face drained of color. "Go. Now." He shut the door behind them. Emily pressed herself against the wall, her tiny fingers clutching the recorder like a lifeline. She could hear voices. Calloway's voice, firm. "You have no jurisdiction here." A deeper voice, cold and unmoving. "The DA sent us. We'll take it from here." Lies. Emily's breath came faster. She knew they weren't from the DA's office. Grayson had sent them. And they were inside the house. Then, gunfire. Sarah gasped, clapping a hand over Emily's mouth before she could scream. Footsteps. Heavy. Rushed. Someone hit the floor. Emily's entire body shook. Then, silence. Emily held her breath. Listened. Footsteps moved toward the bathroom door. A shadow blocked the light underneath. The doorknob twisted. Sarah's arms wrapped tightly around Emily, her heartbeat wild. The door opened slowly. Emily closed her eyes. And then, a voice. Not a deep, cold voice. A voice she knew. "Emily." She snapped her eyes open. Standing in the doorway, bleeding but alive, was Detective Calloway. Sarah sagged in relief. Emily ran to him, tears burning her eyes. "I thought." Calloway caught her, his voice tight with pain. "I'm okay." He glanced back. "But they're not." Emily's stomach turned as she caught a glimpse past him. 2 men lay motionless on the ground. Sarah turned away, her breathing unsteady. Calloway grimaced, pressing a hand against his bleeding shoulder. "We need to move. Now." Sarah nodded, grabbing Emily's hand. "Where do we go?" Calloway took a shaky breath. Then, his eyes locked onto Emily's. "To the courthouse," he said. Emily's grip on the recorder tightened. It was time. Time to end this. The streets were empty, bathed in the eerie glow of streetlights as Calloway's car sped toward the courthouse. Blood stained his shoulder, but he kept his hands steady on the wheel. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, constantly glancing behind them. Her fingers trembled against her seatbelt. Emily sat in the back, gripping the recorder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Nobody spoke, because they all knew the truth. Grayson wasn't just trying to stop them anymore. He was desperate, and desperate men were the most dangerous kind. 2:15 a.m., courthouse parking lot. Calloway pulled into a hidden side entrance, away from the main road. "We don't go through the front," he muttered, his voice tight with pain. "If Grayson has people watching, we can't risk them seeing us." Sarah looked at his bleeding shoulder. You need a hospital. Calloway shook his head. Later. He turned to Emily. You still have it? Emily nodded and held up the recorder. The evidence. The only thing that could take Grayson down. Calloway exhaled, gripping the steering wheel for a moment before opening his door. Stay close. We move fast. They slipped out of the car, moving low and quiet through the side entrance. Calloway swiped his keycard, and the heavy metal door clicked open. They stepped inside. Dark. Empty. The halls were silent, save for the faint hum of the building's electricity. They hurried. The district attorney's office was on the 3rd floor. If they could get the recording into his hands before morning, Grayson wouldn't be able to stop the case from reopening. But as they reached the staircase, Emily froze. Something felt wrong. The air was too still. Too quiet. Sarah felt it too. She gripped Emily's arm, whispering, "Something's not right." Calloway reached for his gun. "We keep moving. Stick to me." They climbed the stairs quickly, the sound of their footsteps echoing. 2nd floor. Then 3rd. They turned the corner toward the DA's office. And stopped dead. Because Grayson was already there. Sitting in the DA's chair. Waiting. His sharp blue eyes locked onto Emily instantly. Behind him stood 2 of his men, one near the window, the other by the door. Sarah sucked in a breath. Calloway raised his gun. "Step away from the desk." "Now." Grayson didn't move. Instead, he leaned back in the chair, smirking. "You really don't know when to quit, do you, detective?" Emily's heart pounded. "Oh. How did he know they were coming?" Then she saw it. The DA's phone. Sitting on the desk. A call was still active. Calloway's face darkened. "You got to him." Grayson smiled. "Of course I did. I own half this city, Calloway. Did you really think you could just walk in here and end me?" Emily's stomach twisted. This was a trap. Grayson had known they were coming the entire time. And now, they were cornered. The man by the window pulled out a gun. So did the one at the door. Sarah gasped, pulling Emily behind her. Grayson sighed. "Let's not make this messy." He turned his gaze to Emily. "You've been quite the little problem, haven't you?" Emily didn't answer. Her fingers curled around the recorder in her pocket. Grayson tilted his head. "You actually think that little device is going to save you?" Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. Grayson's smile widened. "You're a smart girl, but not smart enough." Then, he lifted his hand, and in his fingers was an identical recorder. Emily's blood ran cold. "No," she whispered. Grayson let out a quiet laugh. "You really should have checked your pockets when you got in the car." Emily's breath hitched. He had switched them. Somehow, somewhere between escaping the safe house and getting here, he had stolen the real evidence. And now, they had nothing. Sarah's grip on Emily tightened. Calloway gritted his teeth. Grayson stood up slowly, adjusting his suit. "You lost." He lifted the real recorder and snapped it in half. Emily felt everything crumble. The recording was gone. And so was their proof. Calloway's finger tightened on the trigger. "You son of a..." Grayson lifted a hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The 2 men raised their guns instantly. Stalemate. For a long, agonizing second, nobody moved. Emily's breath was shaky. They had lost. She had risked everything, almost died, to get that evidence. And now it was gone. Grayson smiled. "Here's what's going to happen." He pointed to the door. "You're going to walk out of here. You're going to pretend this little night adventure never happened. And in return..." His voice lowered. "I'll let you live." Sarah tensed. Calloway's hand shook slightly on his gun. Emily clenched her fists. "No. No, no, no." They couldn't lose now. There had to be another way. Another. Then it hit her. The phone. Her eyes darted to the DA's desk. The call was still active. And that meant someone was still listening. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. The DA. If he was still on the line, he had just heard everything. Hope flared in her chest. She needed to keep Grayson talking. She stepped forward. Sarah grabbed her. "Emily, don't." But Emily ignored her. She lifted her chin and looked Grayson in the eye. "You really think you've won?" Grayson's amusement faltered slightly. Emily kept her voice strong. "Breaking that recorder doesn't erase what you did." Grayson scoffed. "And who exactly is going to stop me?" "You." Emily's heart raced. Then, very softly, she smiled. "No," she said. "But he will." She jerked her chin toward the phone. Grayson's smirk vanished. His eyes flickered to the desk, and the color drained from his face. Because the call was still going. The realization hit him like a truck. The DA had heard everything. The silence was thick. Then, the DA's voice came through the speaker. "Donald Grayson, you're under arrest." Grayson's face twisted in rage. Sirens blared outside. Then, the front doors burst open. Cops flooded the room. And for the first time in his life, Donald Grayson knew he had lost. The courthouse exploded into chaos. Armed officers stormed in, their weapons raised. "Drop your guns. Hands where we can see them." Grayson's men hesitated for a second too long. And that was all it took. Bang! A warning shot from one of the officers sent them into a panic. One of the men dropped his weapon immediately, his hands shooting into the air. The other tried to run, but Calloway was faster. Crack! He tackled the guy hard, slamming him against the desk. The man groaned, but Calloway twisted his arm behind his back and slapped the cuffs on. "Not today." Sarah grabbed Emily and pulled her close, her hands shaking as officers flooded the room. And Grayson, for the first time ever, he was completely still. His blue eyes burned with rage, but there was nothing he could do. Because the DA had heard everything. The call was still active. And just then, from the speaker, the DA's voice came again, loud and clear. "Donald Grayson, I suggest you comply. Officers are on their way to your residence and your private accounts are already being frozen." Grayson's jaw clenched. His eyes darted to Emily. That sharp, calculating mind of his was still working, still looking for a way out. But there wasn't one. Because this time, Emily had outplayed him. She met his gaze without flinching. Grayson exhaled slowly. Then, with pure venom, he turned to Calloway. "Hope you're proud of yourself, detective." His voice was eerily calm. "You have no idea what you've just done." Calloway smirked. "Oh, I think I do." Two officers grabbed Grayson's arms, yanking them behind his back. The snap of the handcuffs echoed through the room. Sarah let out a shaky breath. Emily didn't blink. Grayson's reign was over. But then, just as he was being led away, he turned his head one last time, and his eyes locked onto Emily. There was no smirk, no panic, just a slow, knowing smile. And two words: "You'll regret this." A cold chill slithered down Emily's spine. She wanted to look away, but she refused to show fear. She had won, and she wasn't going to let him take that away. Grayson was forced toward the exit, his expensive shoes dragging against the tile. The courtroom doors swung open, and then he was gone. 1 hour later, police station. The station was buzzing. Officers moved frantically, phone calls were made, and Donald Grayson's empire was falling apart in real time. But Emily, she was exhausted. She sat curled up on a chair in Calloway's office, her hoodie pulled tightly around her. Her mother sat beside her, a protective hand on her back. Calloway walked in, rubbing his injured shoulder. "Well, it's official." He dropped a stack of legal papers onto his desk. "Grayson's getting booked. The DA is already preparing charges." Sarah's breath hitched. "So, it's over?" Calloway hesitated. Then he exhaled. "For now." Sarah's face twisted in concern. "What does that mean?" Calloway sat down across from them. His expression was grim. "Grayson was powerful," he admitted. "And guys like that, they don't just disappear overnight. His lawyers will fight. His money will protect him, at least for a while." Emily's stomach sank. "So, he could get out," she whispered. Calloway's jaw tightened. "I won't lie to you, kid. He's gonna try." Sarah tensed. "Then what do we do?" Calloway met Emily's gaze. "You stick together," he said simply. "You stay careful. And if he ever comes back..." His voice hardened. "We finish what we started." Emily swallowed hard. Her fingers curled into fists. She wasn't scared. Not anymore. Because she had already beaten Grayson once. And if she had to do it again, she would. That night, as Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of the safe house, she thought about everything that had happened. She thought about her mother, how close she had come to losing her forever. She thought about Calloway, how he had risked everything to protect them. She thought about Grayson, the way he had looked at her before he was taken away. His final words, "You'll regret this." Emily's fingers curled into her blanket. She wasn't stupid. She knew that Donald Grayson was a man who never forgot. But neither did she. And if he ever came back, she'd be ready. Do you think Grayson will try to escape? Or is this really the end? Let us know in the comments. 2 months had passed since Donald Grayson's arrest. His trial was still pending, but with the overwhelming evidence against him, including the recording from the courthouse phone, his empire was crumbling. His businesses were under investigation, his assets were frozen, and most of his allies had abandoned him. But Emily Carter knew better than to relax. Because men like Grayson didn't go down without a fight. She and her mother were placed in witness protection under Calloway's supervision. They had moved to a quiet town in another state, given new identities, and told to lay low. Sarah worked a new job as a bookkeeper, and Emily was enrolled in a small school. On the surface, things seemed normal. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. One evening, as she and her mother were closing up their small apartment, a news report flashed on TV. Donald Grayson had been denied bail. Emily let out a slow breath. She should have felt relieved. So why did it still feel like something was wrong? She glanced out the window. The street was empty. Too empty. Her mother walked in, rubbing her arms. "You should get some sleep, sweetheart." Emily hesitated, then nodded. She climbed into bed, pulling the blankets around her. But sleep never came. At exactly 3:07 a.m., she woke with a start. Something wasn't right. Her ears strained in the silence. Then, a soft creak. Not from inside their apartment. From outside the window. Her pulse spiked. Slowly, she turned her head toward the curtain. A shadow moved outside. Emily's breath caught. She carefully slid out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor. Her mother was asleep in the next room. She reached for the phone on her nightstand, her fingers trembling. Just as she was about to dial Calloway's number, a voice whispered through the window. "I told you you'd regret it." Emily's stomach dropped. She knew that voice. Donald Grayson. That was impossible. He was in custody. He couldn't be here. Unless... Her blood turned to ice. He had escaped. She stumbled backward, her breath coming fast. She needed to wake her mother. She needed to. A crash from the living room made her jump. Emily ran. She burst into her mother's room, shaking her awake. "Mom, wake up. We have to go." Sarah blinked groggily. "What?" A loud bang at the front door. Sarah snapped awake. She grabbed Emily's hand. "We have to move. Now." They rushed toward the back exit. Sarah fumbled with the locks. Emily's heart pounded as she glanced over her shoulder. And froze. The front door swung open. A man stepped inside. Not Grayson, but one of his men. The same one from the courtroom. His cold eyes locked onto them. "You should have stayed quiet, kid." Emily lunged for the kitchen counter, grabbing the first thing she could find, a glass bottle. She hurled it at him. It shattered against his arm, making him curse. Sarah yanked the back door open, shoving Emily outside. "Run!" They bolted into the alley, feet slamming against the pavement. Behind them, the man recovered fast. Emily's lungs burned. They needed a car. A phone. Anything. A black SUV peeled around the corner, cutting them off. Emily skidded to a stop. The back door swung open, and stepping out, calm, composed, and smiling, was Donald Grayson. Emily felt sick. He was supposed to be in jail. Grayson adjusted his cufflinks, stepping toward them. "You didn't think I'd let a little girl ruin me, did you?" Sarah pushed Emily behind her. "Stay away from my daughter." Grayson sighed. "I was going to let you live. I really was. But you just had to keep pushing." A gun clicked. Sarah stiffened. Emily's breath came fast. Grayson's smile was slow and cruel. "It's funny, isn't it? A single spark can burn down a whole life." He raised the gun. Emily's world slowed. She thought of everything. The trial. The fire. The way this man had destroyed their lives. And now, he was going to erase them completely. She should have been scared. But she wasn't. She was angry. A voice cut through the silence. "Drop the gun." The alley exploded with movement. Red and blue lights flooded the scene. FBI agents and SWAT officers surrounded them, guns raised. Calloway stepped forward, his own weapon trained on Grayson. Game over. Grayson's calm mask cracked. He took a slow step back, eyes darting between them. Then, in one desperate move, he grabbed Emily, yanking her in front of him. "Nobody moves!" Sarah screamed. Emily struggled, but his grip was iron-tight. Calloway's face darkened. "Let her go, Grayson." Grayson pressed the gun against Emily's head. "You think I won't do it?" For the first time, Emily smiled. "You already lost," she whispered. Grayson hesitated. Then he heard it. A beep. Then another. Then a small voice from his pocket. His own voice. Repeating the words he had spoken in the alley. A recording. His eyes went wide. Emily wiggled her fingers, revealing the tiny recorder she had stolen from his coat pocket the second he grabbed her. Grayson's face twisted in rage. Before he could react, Emily stomped on his foot and threw her head back, smashing into his nose. He grunted in pain, just enough for Calloway to take the shot. A single bullet. Right in the shoulder. Grayson collapsed. Emily broke free. Officers swarmed in, pinning him to the ground. Sarah scooped Emily into her arms, sobbing. Calloway walked over, staring down at Grayson. "That's for trying to kill a kid." Grayson's breath was ragged, his eyes filled with pure hatred. But this time, there was no way out. No money. No power. No escape. This time, it was over. For real. Emily closed her eyes, gripping her mother's hand. And for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Did you see that coming? What was your favorite moment in the story? Let us know in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching.